Good evening. My name is Natasha Lance, and I am the Executive Director of Core Operations at the T. Colin Campbell Center for Nutrition Studies, otherwise known as CNS. And you are joining us for our monthly Spotlight on Health. This evening, Dr. Michael Hollie will be hosting Dr. Laurie Marbas. I'm going to have just a few housekeeping details to go over with you right now. For those of you who are joining us for the first time, things are going to work a little bit differently this evening. For the Q&A, which will start at 8 p.m. and go to 8:15 p.m., and that's Eastern Time, please put your questions in the Q&A box in the bottom of your Zoom screen. Now, we will not be able to answer everyone's questions live, and so we still appreciate them. They will be aggregated, and we will ask as many of them as we can at the end. So please do put your questions in the Q&A. For those of you who might have to drop off early or have other commitments, we do send a replay, and that replay will be available next Wednesday. Do check your spam folder because sometimes it ends up there. And for those of you who may need closed captioning, at the very bottom of your screen, there should be a box that says CC. If you click on that, then you can enable those captions that you need. Other than that, we ask that you sit back, relax, get ready to learn a lot. And again, please drop your questions in the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. Without further ado, I will hand it over to Dr. Michael Hollie.
Thank you, Natasha. It's great to be here. Welcome, everyone, to Spotlight on Health, sponsored by the T. Colin Campbell Center for Nutrition Studies. We are privileged tonight to have Dr. Laurie Marbas with us. She's going to share a lot of knowledge with us, a lot of practical information that will serve you well in your plant-based journey. Dr. Laurie Marbas, MD, MBA, is a double board-certified family medicine and lifestyle medicine physician who has been utilizing food as medicine since 2012. She holds medical licenses in all 50 states and Washington, D.C., and operates a small concierge practice accepting new patients at drmarbas.com. And we'll put that in the comments down below. Dr. Marbas is the co-founder of The Healing Kitchen with Brittany Giroudi, blending culinary expertise with medical guidance to create a recipe for health. A former co-founder of Mora Medical and Plant-Based Telehealth, she also hosts the Dr. Laurie Marbas podcast and YouTube channel, where she shares her expertise in health, nutrition, and wellness. Laurie received her dual degrees, MD and MBA, from Texas Tech University Health Sciences Center School of Medicine and TTU School of Business. She was honored with the prestigious Gold-Headed Cane Award, symbolizing excellence in the art of medicine and patient care. While in medical school and raising 3 children, she authored 7 books, including the popular Visual Mnemonics series, using cartoons to simplify complex medical concepts, a system she developed to balance motherhood and medical training. She's also a veteran of the United States Air Force. Laurie served in the Middle East and South America. She is also a wife, mother of 3 grown children, author, speaker, an avid hiker and runner, and dedicated to inspiring health and vitality through lifestyle medicine. Welcome, Dr. Marbas. It's great to have you with us this evening.
Oh, thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, so let's start with a little bit of your backstory. Tell us how you arrived at food for medicine.
Yes. Well, it started right after the Air Force. I had been active duty in Virginia, and when we wanted to head back west, where both my husband and I kind of grew up. He was on the West Coast and I was in New Mexico. And we're like, we love the mountains. So let's go to a little town called Rifle, Colorado. And that kind of sets the stage of where I am. So I'm about, I've been a doctor now for a couple of decades, and I was, about halfway in. So in 2012, we had just been there maybe about a year and a half. And, I was doing rural medicine. I was in the ER and in clinic and inpatient and nursing home, just the general spectrum of a family medicine experience. And so I had all sorts of patients, but imagine the type of patient that you would see in Western Colorado with the name rifle, and you're probably not far off. So I think your first speculations would probably have you in the right place. So, but I had a patient who came to me one day and she said, Dr. Marbas, meat and dairy upset my stomach. I said, okay, so let's stop eating meat and dairy. And this was before I had my own plant-based journey. I'd never heard of the word plant-based. I mean, I'd heard the word vegan, but I didn't truly understand beyond the ethical components of that. And I understood intuitively that there were foods that she could eat, but it didn't dawn on me. It's kind of like, I have a pretty thick dimmer switch, I guess. And it just took a second to push up my dimmer switch, which came a month later when she came back with her daughter. And this is the important part of the story. And she said she felt better, but she goes, well, I wanted to bring my daughter with you. And mind you, she made her miss school. So I'm thinking, well, I have 3 kids. I understand, sometimes there's conversations you don't want to have with them. My mom brain went to, am I going to have like a sex talk with this kid? Am I going to have a drug talk? Like, what kind of talk am I going to have? And that's where my brain went. But she goes, now you tell Dr. Marbus what you did. I'm like, okay, I'm ready for it. And she said, well, Dr. Marbus, I really wanted to help my mom eat better. So I started cooking with her. And there wasn't a lot of places to not eat meat or dairy in the town of Rifle, so they cooked at home. And I think that's a very important point here. But the second thing was, she goes, I felt so good that I stopped 2 of my attention deficit disorder medications. So
Wow.
here's a child who's 16, had enough personal and reflection to understand that she was feeling different and decided that she didn't require medications, right? In our society of disease medicine that are just prescribed on a regular basis, like, oh, your kid's not being able to pay attention, okay, let's just give them some medication that potentially have some significant side effects, but it also sets up a child to always feel like they have to have a medication in order to thrive in a body that is made to heal itself and move. We just have to give it the right circumstances. But when she said that, I was like, that is incredible. And the mom looked at me, not as so much as, an upset, but really of concern. She goes, yeah, why was she able to do that? I said, I don't know, but that's the coolest thing I've ever heard of. And the light really came on as we started having this conversation around what they were eating, which of course was plants, right? And I was like, this is really fascinating. And so the first thing I did is I stepped out of the office and I did my Google. And of course, the first book that came up was the China study. And I'm so grateful for that book. And I'm so grateful for Amazon because it got to me in like a day or two. And I spent the next 2 days solid reading it. And I remember there was in our bedroom, and I would just sit on the floor, just going page after page. And this is not a thin book. This is a pretty, dense book. And my husband would walk by. I was like, look at this. They're turning off cancer with plants. And he's like, okay. And like, little did he know his life was going to change. But the cool piece is that I started thinking differently, but I also had to have the presence of mind to look at an opportunity in front of me. Is like, hey, this is a little signal here that something radically changed in a very short period of time. And so I went down the rabbit hole, so to speak, and I have yet to emerge because I just keep finding it so fascinating. But I started thinking, how can I incorporate this more? And I started really just thinking about my own life. I always want to lead by example. And how can I help more patients? Because I was always searching for some way to help patients. And I had another patient come see me, and she had lupus. Now, lupus is an autoimmune disease. It's can be terminal. It can be definitely a lot of morbidity where people struggle to walk and they have kidney issues, and it's just a very difficult disease to manage sometimes. And I had a patient who came to see me. She was like, Dr. Marbas, she was younger than me. I don't think I can keep working, she said. And I was like sitting here thinking to myself, looking at this patient who was on 12 different medications, including immune suppressant medications, high doses of things like prednisone, 50 pounds overweight, anxiety ridden, always in pain, talking about migraines, all this type of stuff. And here she was at the pinnacle of her adulthood, right? Being able to work in her family business, which she loved. And she was like, I don't know if I can keep going. She's just like, I can't. And I was like sitting here thinking to myself the whole time, listening, but going, this is the one. I want to practice this one more time just to make sure this is going to seal the deal for me. And as she continued talking, I said, I don't think there are any medications I can offer you. How about this? You change what's on the end of your fork. And I told her, I said, I have limited evidence, but what I've read and my patient experience tells me this might help you. And she's like, I'll try anything. And at that time, we checked her CRP, which is an inflammatory marker, and hers was 3 times high normal, even on all these medications. And I said, why don't you come back in 2 weeks and we'll repeat it. And in that 2 week time, when she came back in 2 weeks, her CRP had dropped just outside normal, so about 300% drop. She lost 8 pounds. Her migraines just disappeared magically. And she felt amazing, better than she was. And she kept going. And if you fast forward about 5 months, she had lost 50 pounds and had dropped 7 of those 12 medications. And over the course of 2 years, for the first time, she started having blood work that showed no lupus antibodies. So that was quite remarkable in the sense that we could take someone who was literally on the verge of like, I can't even function in society where I can even do a job, to losing 50 pounds, stopping medications, and going on to live her life. And that was the really call. That was it for me. So that was a Friday. So I went home and I was like, family, to the 13-year-old, the 15-year-old, and the 18-year-old, and my husband, I was like, we're going on a plant-based diet. And they're like, okay. And because, I do all the cooking, I do all the shopping. And my husband's like, well, are you going to keep cooking? He goes, I'm like, yeah. He goes, okay, whatever. And so I literally took everything out that was animal based. You name it, milk, eggs, turkey bacon, we thought was healthy, all the meat and dairy that was in the home. I had a freezer in the garage full of about a quarter of a grass-fed beef, thinking this was healthy. And now I'm going, how am I going to get rid of this? I'm not going to put it out in the garbage. When we lived in Colorado, you do not want to be attracting certain things. And not only that, I was like, well, I'm not going to give it away because I felt like this is different now, right? That I'm not going to give food. I'm in the process of wanting to heal people. I'm not going to give them something that I feel is not healing. And I was like, do I give it to the animal shelter? What do I do? So remember, that was Friday. Then on Sunday morning, we had gone to church and we came back, and that freezer had broken. Now,
Oh,
I don't know if you've ever walked in a place where you had decaying meat, but that smell and then seeing the liquids literally coming down the garage floor, oh my heavens. My husband's like, if you hadn't been with me, I could have sworn that you had unplugged this freezer. I was like, nope, that is a sign that we're never going back on that plant-based diet, and or going back to the regular diet. We're staying on this plant-based diet, and we haven't stopped since. That was 13 years ago now. And so that's how it all started with a
yeah,
patient.
yeah. That's a great story. How a couple of patients educated their doctor basically and got their doctor on this path to plant-based medicine, really, and food as medicine. So excellent story. And the meat component of that tops it.
Yeah, I can't even walk down the meat aisle now. Like, it really, I have a visceral response ever since then.
Yeah, yeah. So, Laura, you have a program to educate women on menopause. Tell us a little bit about some of the struggles that women have with menopause, and a little bit about the program that you offer.
Yeah, of course. So, I've been eating this whole food plant-based diet. I exercise, I'm active, I'm doing all the things in lifestyle medicine that we talk about, managing stress, building community, all those things. And so I'm 54, and last year, well, now I guess it was 2023. I had actually been really working hard, and I ran a half marathon, which is 13 miles, PR'd it, got a personal best with my daughter in Boston, where she lives. And I was like, wow, I really feel amazing. But within about 2 weeks, I fell off the menopause cliff. So there was a period of obviously perimenopause where the periods were starting to be different, but that was literally the last one. But I started having some wild symptoms, joint discomfort, uh, definitely had the hot flashes. My mother and my grandmother had horrible menopause experiences. So I kind of already expected something, but I thought I eat a plant-based diet. It should be fine. Um, but it wasn't so fine. I had disrupted sleep. My cholesterol my LDL, my bad cholesterol went above 100 for the first time in my entire life. And I just, again, went down another rabbit hole in the context of menopause and became a menopause certified practitioner because I was so drawn to understanding that if I'm struggling with this and I'm vocal about being transparent with my experience and I'm not going to, hide anything. I was like, so I wanted to share my experience because there must be others out there as well. And especially if you're, what I thought I was doing everything right, which I was, but understanding there's another conversation here that I think we tend to not have, and that is sometimes you think you're doing everything right and you are, but things still happen. And it's okay. That's where we can see this beautiful marriage of lifestyle medicine and regular, traditional medicine. And there might be a place, not for everybody, but for some people, but it should be a part of the discussion to say, do we include, in hormone replacement therapy, or do we use other medications to manage these symptoms that can be quite life disrupting? And I would say the response has been quite overwhelming. I had quite a few patients make appointments because I'm like, so we're so happy to hear you say this as a physician who's eating this way and still had a struggle. And it really can be life-changing to have that opportunity to not feel ashamed or that you've done something wrong and you still struggle through this transition. It's just that's all it is. It's a transition, but some people will have different responses. And I think I have my own thoughts on how things happen and why that happened to me. But it's a great conversation starter. And so the program is just basically it's understanding menopause, master menopause, and feel fabulous. It is also part of a newer program that I kind of launched together because they often go hand in hand is mastering metabolism and losing weight. So that's really the group that they join. And so I offer a course, an ebook. I love writing ebooks and books and I just love that stuff. I love educating and teaching, but it walks them through what is menopause, what's their severity, why does their cholesterol get all wacky, why do they start gaining weight when they're doing everything the same, what are those symptoms and what do they mean, and then what is the treatments available to them based on their current state of health, their genetics, what are their risk factors, what should they be doing, and can they tweak things differently, because I was eating 2 to 3 servings of soy a day. So I was doing all those things, but when you look at menopause research, many times it's just about hot flashes. Oh, it's so much more. There's 30 plus symptoms of menopause, and I felt like I had all of them at once. And but I think, I thank the universe and God for this opportunity because I have no problem speaking of the conversation. I'm open to what I need to learn to help people. And if that means I have to experience it myself, so be it. But again, it was a really joyful opportunity to learn, to remain curious. And I think that's part of it. Instead of saying, oh, I'm just going to suffer and I'm going to hide this from people. And, oh, see me on my YouTube videos going, oh, never mind, a hot flash is here. I'm going to tell you, hey, I'm having a hot flash or something. So, that is a conversation that I want to encourage people to have and walk away feeling confident that they have the knowledge and know the right questions to ask. But so many doctors are they're uneducated about nutrition. So patients don't even feel they can speak to their practitioner about that. But two, menopause completely is just like plant-based nutrition. It literally, I think the education and understanding and looking back at the old research and how the new research and looking through a different perspective and understanding that the Women's Health Initiative that was first released in 2002, when you actually look at the data, shows a little bit different picture. And so we can't be walking in fear about a discussion about where 50% of the population, if you live long enough, is going to transition through this. We should be able to talk to women about this. Why don't we talk about it? Like, oh, you just have to suffer. You're just gonna have to deal with it. That's a very common conversation.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of how that started, and that's why you'll see a lot of menopause videos on my YouTube. I'm calming that down now. I'm jumping back, giving more implants and where people are. But I was like, I just had to share. As I was learning, I shared. And so this last year has just been really cool to learn that.
Yeah, a lot of valuable information there that a lot of people maybe, like you said, kind of accept it, this is the way it is, and not knowing there's some solutions to some of those issues. Yeah,
Exactly,
yeah.
100%.
One of the questions I get asked often when I speak and with the patients, particularly in postmenopausal, but some premenopausal, is osteopenia and osteoporosis. So many women deal with that. And they, their doctors say, well, you just need to take some calcium and do some more exercise. Tell us a little bit about how you approach osteoporosis, because it's, calcium and weight-bearing exercise is important, but it's more than that. So tell us some of the things that you share with your patients.
Yeah, so I think it's really important that you're an individual, right? So there's going to be some principles around a healthy life, which is what I'd recall, would say is lifestyle medicine, right? So it's eating a plant predominant diet, it's your rest, it's your stress, it's your exercise, all of those things. But then in the context of that, that's what everyone should be doing. There's going to be some genetic differences, there's going to be life experience. And so this is really the important piece here is when someone is diagnosed with osteoporosis, when did that start occurring? Right? So this is an important piece. We don't look at children. This should be a pediatric discussion. So when we look at osteoporosis, we're looking at decades of decisions that led to, bones that are not in the ideal health, but they are still dynamic bones, right? They can respond to different things. Now, of course, there's some nuance to that conversation versus if you've had what we call a fragility fracture or something. This is where if you've already had a pretty significant fracture, if you're got severe osteoporosis, that's a different category than what I'm talking about here is early osteoporosis or osteopenia. You don't have any restrictions on weight bearing and different things because of your other current status. So this is the piece here is like, was this because you didn't have a nutritious diet as a child? Maybe you went through a period that you had rheumatoid arthritis and you were on steroids for a period of time, and then you went plant-based and it got better. So now that, the steroids set you up. So there's some cause and effect here in the past that's another piece here. So we can't just, oh, I've been on the plant-based diet for 6 months and now I'm diagnosed with osteoporosis. It must have been the plant-based diet. That is not the truth. Okay, the truth is I wanted to set this up in the context that you got here over many, many years, right? And we don't know where. The important piece also is if I can get women before we hit perimenopause, menopause, because that's where we have an acceleration of bone loss. So when you hit the age 30, that's kind of where they think that you've topped out on your bone mineral density bank account, right? Instead of you're always adding, but then you start to see a slight decline. Unless you start incorporating some lifestyle medicine kind of principles to actually maintain. That's where you're making sure you're getting enough calcium, right? Making sure you're getting the vitamin D, making sure that you're doing your bone, your resistance training. Those pieces will help, but also speaking to women around that perimenopause, because if we can make sure that they're doing those things right and they have healthy bones now, we could probably make that bridge into menopause, postmenopause with healthy bones afterwards. But I've absolutely had patients who walk in with osteopenia. They start incorporating certain things, making sure they're getting enough protein, making sure they're getting all the things that they can in their diet, right? So we look at their diet. We look, for example, with Chronometer, and we start saying, I need you to log for 1 week everything that goes in your mouth. What's your regular diet? Are we focusing in on some soy products? There's some great phytoestrogens here that are going to really help us build bone. Are you doing those exercises? Look at their holistic picture in the context of their clinical past is like, yeah, this is what happened, but I've had this, I was diagnosed with this, 10 years ago. And, or maybe they went into surgical menopause. I have more than a few of these patients and they're 35, 39. They were not put on hormone replacement therapy, which basically throws them into menopause, 15 years early. Oh my heavens, they're definitely going to be suffering. And so there's a lot of factors here. But again, the severe osteoporosis and those that have had a fracture, that is a different conversation. And there's risk to not using medication, most likely. But again, it's a very difficult conversation because some people, again, just feel they should be able to, become superwoman or superman at the age of 70 overnight by eating plants. It's not a panacea. It's a great thing. It's the most powerful thing I could tell patients to do. But again, it's a nuanced conversation. It's a personalized approach for each person who walks through the door. And but we have to look at everything on the table, lifestyle, medications, what's the history. So that's how I want people to walk in. Don't be afraid. It's just a conversation. You still get to decide what you want to do, but you should be open to the conversation. When you close your mind to even talking about medication or just talking about this or whatever, or, you believe something, you're just really putting your head in the sand and decreasing your opportunity to feel better and do better.
Yeah, excellent, excellent. And I know you're a runner, so that's part of your weight bearing exercise. But speak to exercise specifically. What if a person is not a runner? What would you recommend? And you also, I know, recommend some strength training as well. Touch on that a bit.
Yeah, so I really think it's important to understand as we walk through this perimenopause, menopause, and for men as well, right, as they're going through that transition as they get a little older, it's going to be very important that we understand your muscle mass is like this beautiful thing you have to savor and love and protect, okay? Because it will keep you insulin sensitive. It will make you less likely to fall. You're going to be able to function without the fragility later years. So it's really important that you understand that. And so there's different ways to approach it. There's going to be exercise like with the running, which definitely does some compounding of the axial skeletal and those type of things. But I would say you also want to include at least minimally 2 to 3 times per week some type of resistance training. Now, it could be 30 minutes. The resistance training, you really want to use those big muscles, right? So like squats or deadlifts, but you don't have to start like with crazy. You could just start with body weight exercise, right? You can use bands. Again, you may want to see a physical therapist if you've had an injury or something to walk you through what is a good program for you. The way you want to approach this is understanding that you don't have to go all out and be like a gym rat and you're not going to get what my boys call swole. You're not going to get all fat and crazy. Like you just want to go in and make sure that you're functional. Think about the functional movements here. And mobility training is a really good thing too. That would be a way of saying you could build flexibility with strength. So there's a few different ways to approach it. It's a little bit different than your traditional strength training. But for example, I had a patient who was in her mid to late 60s, and we were just talking about habits. I talk a lot about habits because that is where the rubber meets the road. You can say you have all the intention, but until you start implementing the actual cycle of building a habit, you're not going to go anywhere. And so we start small. We really look at BJ Fogg's work when you talk about tiny habits and understanding how to build those and all the principles that work, because it works. Once you start employing it, it works. But anyway, I started working with her. I was like, where can we do some type of resistance training? She goes, oh, Dr. Marbus, I don't know if I can do it. And I was like, you can do it. Just tell me. I was like, what do you do every day that even if you were in the Amazon jungle, what would you have to have? She goes, I'd have to have coffee. And I'm like, okay, let's talk about your coffee. And she said, I was like, well, what do you do when you're brewing your coffee? I don't drink coffee. I never liked the taste. But she's like, what is it, steeping, brewing, whatever? She goes, yeah, I sit there and wait for it. I was like, how long is it? I don't know, 5 minutes or something. And what was really funny is I was like, okay, while you're there, can you do just 2 push-ups against the countertop? And she goes, 2 push-ups against the countertop. I was like, she goes, are you serious? I'm like, yes, I'm serious. She goes, okay. And I was like, okay. So that's what she did. And it was funny. I made a note of it. But we had other things to deal with on her health. And so over the course of a few months, she goes, Dr. Marbus, you didn't ask me about my push-ups. I was like, well, excuse me. I was like, well, tell me about your push-ups. And she goes, I can do 60, 60
Wow.
against a counter. And I would ask anyone here to go do 60 push-ups against your counter and tell me that that's not a challenge. And she goes, oh yeah, look at this. And she's like really bringing up her guns, so to speak. And I was like, that is phenomenal. I was like, I think you could probably go down to the ground now. And she goes, yeah. And so what happened here is a couple of things. She started small, anchored it to a routine that she was already doing, and then she built confidence over time. And she saw the benefits of like, if I could do 60 push-ups, And while I'm waiting for my coffee, what else can I do? So then it brought curiosity and excitement and joy. I was like, this is the beginning of healing her mindset that she couldn't do it, right? Remember, the first conversation was, I can't. I was like, no, that's I won't. So we can make it where you can, because we make it so small that you're like, this is the dumbest thing I've ever heard of. Of course I can do that. That's where I'm talking. That's what we got to start. Yeah. So.
Excellent. Excellent. Yeah, let's shift over to weight loss. Next week, I'm starting a 6-week seminar on weight loss here in our local area. And weight loss is a big issue. You know,
Yeah.
obesity is rampant in the United States and the world in general. There's a lot of, Ozempics and Monjaros and Wegovy's and Zepbounds and things like that floating around. Address weight loss a little bit. Women always tell me, you men can lose weight a lot quicker than us women. So address that a little bit. How do you advise people?
Yes. So I think this is a really wonderful question. And I think this is a common experience. You have two people, they go plant-based, a husband and wife. The man will always lose more weight. And why is that? Maybe it's because they have more lean muscle mass.
Yeah.
Okay. So this is really, I need people to understand muscle mass equals metabolic furnace. Okay. This is where you burn those calories, even at rest. It's a metabolically active organ tissue. And so the really interesting thing is, years ago, I launched my podcast in 2016. So 9 years, it'll be 9 years in October. And the reason I did it outside of just meeting cool people was I had one question. I wanted to understand why someone could go from, let's say, 400 pounds for 40 years, and they suddenly could drop 200 pounds over a course of a year or two and then keep it off for 10 more years. Like, what happened? Like, what was going, like, what's the magic here? And it was interesting as I started asking different questions, I was getting different answers. And I think that's a really important clue here. So instead of saying, why can't I lose weight? It's like, what can I do today to encourage my body to be healthy? Because when you start thinking about it differently, you're going to start doing things differently. That's number one. So I would say the number one piece here is we've got to change how we approach weight loss, and not from one of like, I have to have it now and I'm going to starve myself to do it, because there's consequences to losing. If you do a very severe caloric deficit, you're going to lose a lot of muscle mass. And again, like I said, you can only do that for so long. And now you're in a worse state, because remember, at rest, that muscle is your metabolic furnace. So we have to pay attention to that. And so the other piece that I do is that sometimes people go, they might eat say they transition to a whole food plant-based diet. This is one lesson I learned very early on, is I was just telling people, go eat plants. Just go eat plants. They would go to their produce section, which is fabulous, but they would eat all the food there, but it's mostly fruits and vegetables. They're not very calorically dense foods. They would come back as like, I'm hungry, right? And so they're hungry all the time. So then before you know it, they're eating back the way they were, because they weren't feeling well and they were hungry. I was like, oh, clue. This means that I need to tell people, don't forget those middle aisles with your beans and legumes and your whole grains. Build your meal around that. Increasing your protein will decrease the cravings. And we want to actually support that muscle. So I encourage people, especially if they're really struggling on how to build a balanced plate, is try to aim for at least a gram of protein per kilogram of your ideal body weight, which is somewhere around BMI of 22, because that's what, this is just me suggesting. You guys take it whatever you can, go find whatever size you want. But I'm just going to say, after working with thousands of patients on this thing, that seems to work. One, it helps with the craving, it supports their muscle mass, it'll decrease our risk of sarcopenia, losing that muscle mass as we get older, and you will start seeing things different. And that is how we need to approach it. But I build on it from the mindset piece. I tell them, we're going to talk about the habits that are going to encourage you to lose the weight. But first, we have to walk in this with a different mindset and a different set of beliefs, and understanding this is going to be a different journey than the one you've had before. It's not one of quick fixes. It's one about a different way of thinking about things, so that we can start building the belief structures and seeing the evidence by doing those tiny habits. And over the course of 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 12 months, you've done those habits consistently. And so now you're a different person. So now you see yourself as someone who's active in losing weight. I have a really good, interesting, there was a lady on Instagram, and I've never spoke to her in person, but she had a really cool post. And she was very, very ill until she was about 65. She lost her pancreas. She had a pancreatic transplant. She had a heart attack. She was significantly overweight. But one day she said, you know, I'm done suffering. And that was a decision. It's a mindset. It's a change. And she goes, I started doing these things. I started exercising little by little. She started going to the gym. She started eating better. And before you know it, she started to shed the weight. And she goes, you know, I went on vacation with my husband and he took some pictures while we were on vacation. And when we got back, I looked at these pictures and she goes, this is really odd. She goes, that's not me. She goes, I see myself as someone who's walking around in a bikini, feeling good and strong and fabulous. But this one person has still got some weight to lose. She goes, interesting. And she says, because her belief, she was seeing herself as a different person. She started acting like that person, started doing the habits and everything. Because the laws are the same. You have to eat less calories and expend more calories. That is the truth. But there's ways to approach it to make it sustainable, where you maintain your muscle mass. You'll see the body composition change. The scale might fluctuate, but what you see is a person. Your labs improve. Your insulin resistance goes away. You know, you feel stronger. That is how you approach. At least I do with weight loss, and that is the sustainable way in moving forward.
Yeah, you touched on a couple things that I wanted to get to. You sent an email out to your subscribers today. I found it very, very helpful. It says, most people fail at plant-based diets because they approach it with the wrong mindset. And you mentioned mindset several times. So talk a little bit about that, because that goes for weight loss as well as, building a plant-based diet. So talk a little bit about our mindset and goals and reassessing that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I think it's a really, with anything in life, but especially when you're looking, you heard a story. Let's say you become, it's kind of like the New Year's resolution, right? You heard someone talk about a particular diet or particular exercise, and you get really pumped up. You're like, yeah, let's do it. And so we walk in with a mindset expecting to be where someone is maybe a year or two in a journey, and we expect it to have it in a week or 2 weeks. So that's one mindset, is having these unrealistic expectations of something that's going to happen on your timeline. And so that's number one, is walking into the place of a plant-based diet and understanding that yes, you will see things change. You will see things change pretty quickly. I mean, the other lesson I learned in my first year of telling people go eat plants is stopping 60 units of insulin for a type 2 diabetic, someone who had type 2 diabetes, within 3 days. And so she didn't shift a significant amount of weight, but her body was like, oh yeah, this is what I need. And so she didn't need that much medication. And so when you walk into the plant-based diet, I want you to have one understanding you're on a healing journey. You're not in a healing goal, right? If we think about this as a journey, that's going to be a really important piece here. And the mindset that you're going to have, be able to stop all your medications overnight and feel frustrated when you're not seeing something change. So remember, the frustration comes from when you see a struggle. That's the other piece here, is that we're so attuned to just having what we want when we want it and then just walking away. And I feel like we're living in a very different world. We live in a very consumer driven world, so things are easy to get and easy to dispose of. And so we almost take it like that, right? We try to change our diet, and if it doesn't work for us, within a few days or a week or 2 weeks, we throw it away, versus looking at this and going, what is the overarching theme here? We're eating more fiber, we're eating more plants. We know intuitively this is the best way to eat for every single human who walks the earth. You will see benefits. Now, how quickly and how fast, one is compliance, how well you're eating, the other things that you're dealing with in your body. So that's the piece here, is to understand it's just a matter of tweaking. If you're not doing well or seeing the results that you want, let's talk about it. Let's understand what you're doing on a day-to-day basis that can make sure you're taking your B12 supplement, making sure you're eating, don't be afraid to add a handful of nuts and seeds into a healthy, balanced, whole food, plant-based diet. That's going to lead you where you want to go. And so the mindset piece here is, when you see the challenges arise, guys, which they will, I think we talked before we went live. I was like, I've decided I'm the tweaker of the plant-based diet because people struggle. That's the majority of my patients. We look at their labs, we look at what they're doing, and you sounded like you had that same experience with patients. They come in and they're, I do have the worried well. They're doing fantastic. I check some labs. We look at a few little things here, and they just go on about their lives. That's fantastic. Those are the highlight reels. But my day-to-day in the trenches is people are struggling a little bit, and we do some tweaking, and guess what? They get off and they're the highlight reel. And so that's really the important piece is don't be afraid to ask questions. Don't be afraid to look at what you're doing and change, right? Because if you keep doing the same thing, and you're going to get the same results until you tweak something, right? I tell people it's like the plant-based journey is like this. You can continue going down north. Like if you're heading north and you're seeing yourself traveling, but here you decide, I'm going to switch one thing. I'm going to eat more fiber, more plants. And so that's like a 1 degree change, right? But over time, right now in the very beginning, it's just like it doesn't seem so much. But as you go and you go 2 months, 3 months, 4 months, watch over time how you're so far from the path that you would have been on before, right? So this is just a vector. It's just like literally, it's like physics. Like it's like you just change the 1 degree and it'll just over time get further and further away from where you would have been before. Just like an airplane, they don't go a straight line. They're constantly auto-correcting, right? To get you from A to B. They're constantly changing. It's not a linear flight. Same with us. Like, and people expect, oh, my weight didn't go down every single week for the last 4 weeks, so this must not work. Okay, no. Again, this is a mindset, understanding that we just have to work with where we are and having a mindset that's open to possibility and open to looking at challenges as learning opportunities, looking at setbacks. They're not setbacks. Challenges are just data to be deciphered and looked at as like, okay, what can I do here that makes things better? And if you don't know what to do, that's when you ask for help, right? So ask for people who have been there and done well for you, and be okay with their conversation. You don't walk in defensive like, I can only do this way, the plant-based diet. I can only do this part of the plant-based diet. Be open to conversations about understanding that some people need a little bit more of this and a little less of that. That's okay. This is where they are right now. For example, if I have someone who's very insulin resistant, has type 2 diabetes, on a lot of medications, I may tell them to eat more of a lower glycemic index plant foods, because if I tell them to go eat, they're deciding to go eat some oatmeal and some very, very ripe bananas or something, their blood sugar is going to go high. That is the way insulin resistance works, right? These are carbohydrates that break down very quickly, absorbed faster than a salad and some healthy avocado on there with, some legumes and stuff, right? So again, there will be a point that they can eat that without those consequences, but that's just a different right now because that's where this person is. So that is okay. That's the mindset. I just want a healing mindset. You walk in as like this, I'm on my healing journey, and it'll be a continual journey as I keep going.
Excellent. Excellent. So we have about 15 minutes remaining, and I want to tell you the couple things that I want to be sure we talk about. I want you to touch on, you said it right there, but insulin resistance, talk a little bit about that. And I want also to save some time to talk about your new book and some of the other programs you have available, Healthy Kitchen. I want to talk about your telehealth practice. So you got 15 minutes. So those are our topics. So let's divide it up however you're comfortable.
Yeah, so I think it's a nice little segue into insulin resistance. So insulin resistance, think of it as the precursor to pre-diabetes, type 2 diabetes, right? It's where your body is not utilizing carbohydrates as well as we'd like, right? So you might see it as on your labs, for example. Let's say 10 years ago, your fasting blood sugar was 75, 80. 5 years later, it's like 85, 87, 90. Last year it was 102, 103. Your A1C is hovering like it was 5.2, 5.5, 5.6. Now it's 5.7. Alarm bells ringing. Suddenly you're like, you need medication. You need to lose weight. No, the conversation should have started looking at the trends, right? So what is happening here? What we're seeing here is that it's a compounding effect, right? You're going to it's literally happening by every single day. Your decision is a decision it compounds over time, just like the interest in your bank, right? So this is your health bank, so to speak. So when you're eating foods that are high in saturated fats, right? These are foods that are primarily animal products, ultra processed foods, including the mock vegan, meats and cheeses and all those things. Those high saturated fats, what they start is they start being stored in places they should not be stored, like your muscle and your liver. Now, a simple way to approach this, there's some nuances in that. I like to get deep into the weeds, but I'm going to make it very simple as far as like an analogy. So imagine if you have a cell and you eat something, a carbohydrate, a glucose, breaks down into glucose, excuse me, and a normal, someone with a normal metabolic health, and their pancreas goes, oh, look, there's glucose. I'm going to spit out some insulin. Woo! And so the glucose cannot enter the cell until that insulin, which is a key, opens the door to let the glucose in the cell. Okay, that's how, in a very simplified manner, it's supposed to work. Now, if we take a poor cell that has, been subject to an environment that we've made some decisions here of high saturated fats. Now, imagine, when I was a kid, my mom used to keep those old Folger coffee cups and throw in the drippings from all the fried chicken and the different things and keep it like the lard, and they would recook it because it added flavor. My skin crawls thinking about that now. But imagine that. Now you have a cell and that keyhole is full of that lard, right? That greasy stuff. Now you eat, the glucose is banging on the door, let me in. The insulin is being spit out by the little pancreas and it doesn't work as well, right? That key cannot get into that lock with the lard in it, so to speak, right? So that's what's happening here with insulin resistance. And over years, as you hit, once you get that diagnosis of type 2 diabetes, you've also lost some of your pancreatic function. Upwards of about 50% of your pancreas has stopped working or been destroyed because of this process. So now we have little manufacturer workers in the pancreas. They're making insulin as fast as they can because they're having to work overtime because they have to make more insulin to deal with this environment where the glucose is not entering the cells. So now we have insulin resistance compounded by high insulin levels, hyperinsulinemia, which drives you to gain more weight, which drives the process even further. So if you have someone who's now decided to graduate into type 2 diabetes with their habits, and now they throw them on insulin. So now we give people insulin, which drives even further weight gain, which again makes the situation even worse. So that is the insulin resistance piece. So then we look at how to reverse that. It's like, well, stop doing the habits that cause it to begin with. That's when we start eating a whole food plant-based diet. And you can include healthy nuts in whole form, whole avocados, that's part of it, maybe a handful a day. And I tell people, don't be afraid of the healthy fats. They have good minerals. They help you absorb the fat-soluble vitamins, but include, the fruits, the veggies, beans, whole grains. Those are the type of things. And that's where we see rapid improvement in blood sugars. You'll see insulin resistance decrease. And the insulin resistance also messes with your hormones. It messes with your cholesterol. It messes with all sorts of stuff. And so it's a nice little, it's a very interesting thing. In the hormone piece, especially as you enter perimenopause, menopause, that can also be affected. You get a little bit rise of insulin resistance. You start building more visceral fat, which is inflammatory, which increases risk of heart disease and heart attacks. Look, when you think about women as they transition into menopause, you go from having a lower risk with men to equivalent risk. Well, what's changed here? We said goodbye to this thing called estrogen, right? And so some things start shifting. And I saw it firsthand when my LDL literally went up like 40 points. And I was like, what is going on? And so there's the insulin resistance. Was that answer most of you where you wanted to that with that question?
Exactly. That's where I
Okay.
wanted to go.
I think that, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I was just going to say, this is the book here.
That's where I wanted to go next.
Okay, perfect. It's called The Plant-Based 101, The Ultimate Guide for Mastering a Plant-Based Diet. Brittany Giroudi and I, my little buddy over there, she's so cute. She's only 4'11", just had her first baby last year. So we started this thing called the Healing Kitchen about, it'll be 2 years this summer. And what happens is we just started meeting weekly live with people. She would bring in 2 recipes and I'd answer medical questions. And that's how it started. Now it's evolved into a community. We have a community on a platform called School where people can connect with one another. We still have our weekly meetings every Wednesday. And then I started doing monthly workshops about cholesterol, about osteoporosis, about menopause, so I could write my ebook that I feel so empowered to do. And one of these was because we started looking at all the questions people had, and we're like, we really should put together a plant-based 101. This could be for someone who's just entering into this conversation of what is a plant-based diet, to those who've been on it for a while and going, maybe what are some areas that maybe I could tweak? Let me help that. So, or how do I deal with social situations? How do I get enough protein? What labs should I be looking at? That is a very popular thing. When people ask me, I had one patient ask me, I would love to know, Dr. Marbus, what labs I should be getting regularly. So I started going, that's a great question. So let me explain it. So I've been asked to give conference speeches about this. I have a free ebook that I can send people. Those are the things that are really nuanced, and you can look at people who've been on a plant-based diet. So many times they'll have a lower white blood cell count. Why is that? Well, it's because they have low inflammation, right? You also want to make sure that you're checking your B12, especially if you have someone who's like, I'm just going to eat fortified foods with B12 in it. I was like, that's probably not enough. And so those are conversations, right? Looking at another one would be, I had patients, not a whole lot, but would go salt, oil, sugar free, which again is fine. But they don't look at the iodine, right? So now they have no source of iodine because it typically comes with iodized salt. So now they're suddenly like, why do I have this diagnosis of hypothyroidism? Why is my thyroid not functioning well? Well, because your thyroid needs a regular source of iodine to create thyroid hormone. And so that, those are the type of things that I want to point out. How to build, why are you hungry on a plant-based diet? Why are some people hungry? Why do all like, how do I raise children? What about being pregnant? What about someone who's older? How do I even start? Like, what are the cooking techniques? How do I build flavor? What do I do around the holidays? What do I do with trelling? These are all things in here. It's very simple, right? I am not going to write, at least this book wasn't intended to be like a Dr. Greger book, right? I'm not going to go diving into science of every single thing in here because that would defeat the purpose. The purpose is to be a guidebook, right? Quickly, like I can scan 1 or 2 pages and get my answer, at least the beginning of where I need to be thinking, where I can go find the answer. And there are recipes, there's around almost 30 recipes, simple recipes to get you started or help you understand time crunches, right? How about a budget? What are those things? So all those different things is why we built this book, and you can find it on Amazon. We're going to have some other ones coming out that probably more focused on this particular disease processes, and it's going to be focused on building the habits. So we're calling it Healing Habits from the Healing Kitchen. And so, what are the healing habits for type 2 diabetes, cholesterol, those type of things. But diabetes will probably be our first book that we reach out. But we want to approach it in a how to build sustaining habits and healing mindset, those type of things.
Yeah, that's excellent because what's lacking sometimes is the practical information. Like you said, you can just open something, don't have to read 50 pages. In a couple pages, I have my answer, and
Right.
I can apply that to what I'm doing, my journey.
Right.
And that's
Exactly.
really important.
Yeah.
When I speak around the country, one of the frequent questions is, where do I find a plant-based doctor in my area?
Right.
So in your introduction, we talked about the fact that you have medical license in 50 states and Washington, D.C. So anywhere in the U.S., if somebody needs a plant-based doctor to maybe help them start their journey or tweak their journey or whatever, maybe it's more specific. Maybe it's a menopause or weight loss or osteoporosis. You're available to help with them, help them
Right.
with that sort of thing. And your website is very clear. Here's the particulars, here's the fee schedule. And so tell me a little bit about your telehealth practice and what you've been experiencing.
Yeah. So as kind of like you mentioned before, I originally got all those licenses back in 2020. Well, it took a little bit longer than that, but it started, there's a whole journey that how I entered into telemedicine. That's a whole nother hour-long conversation. But in March of 2020, just coincidentally with COVID, we launched plant-based telehealth. And I was the first physician because I was a co-founder with Anthony Masiello, who was at that time my business partner. And we started bringing in other doctors, Dr. Clapper, my friend Chris Miller, and some other incredible physicians who are still practicing at Love Life. And so there's also some great physicians as well. So what that was the process to say that we are in all 50 states, right? It didn't necessarily mean I wanted to practice and see everyone in all 50, but I wanted to be able to say we are in all 50 states. If you are in South Dakota in some little town, we're there for you, right? So that was really important. And so now I've just kind of kept it. It's way easier to maintain than to get those licenses. And so I kind of have a system now that works pretty well. And so I see patients across the country, a couple of days a week that I see patients. And yeah, and it's a joy, right? It's to help people along their plant-based journey. But I try to also provide as much free resources as possible. But the Healing Kitchen is really where that kind of, I have a Master Metabolism Lose Weight group, which is more intensive coaching and helping. If you need a CGM, if you need labs ordered, I can do that for you. But we really walk about the habits and everything. But then we have the Healing Kitchen for those who are just like, I need more help with the cooking. I can ask a few medical questions, and we do deep dive in topics every month with the ebook. And what the most popular part about the ebooks is protocols and checklists. So everything has a protocol and checklist, like just like get to the meat. And that's literally why we wrote it this way. And so that's kind of what that is. And so I'm happy to see patients. I've got a nice little practice going right now. And so I don't know how many more I can say, but I'm spreading out close to a month now,
Booked
with
out.
appointments. Yeah, booked out. So certainly I take waiting lists, but you should be able to book out at least 60 days, I think. So just FYI, if you can't find anything, just message us and I'll find somewhere for you.
Excellent. Well, I appreciate what you're doing. It was interesting when you were telling your story. China Study was also the book that launched me on my plant-based journey. And it's funny because you said, fascinating. That's what I say. I turn page. That's fascinating. I never heard this stuff before, So thank you, Dr. Colin Campbell and Dr. Tom Campbell for writing the China Study. And if any of our listeners haven't read it, it's worth it. So
yeah, absolutely.
yeah. So Natasha, come on and tell us any questions that you may have for Dr. Marbus.
You're muted, my friend.
You're muted. You're muted. You're muted, Natasha.
Oh, I am. Well,
there
good.
you go. Start
Now,
again.
there we go. So I said, now we get down to the exciting part. So yes, people have had some really great questions. Would you just repeat the name of your book one more time? Because people are really excited. And I will, everybody, send the title out in the replay link next week.
It's Plant-Based 101, the ultimate guide for mastering a plant-based diet. If you just go into Amazon and type in Plant-Based 101 and Dr. Marbus or Marbus, it'll pop up. Or Brittany, Giroudi, yeah, that'll pop it up. But the Plant-Based 101, that would be the best way to look for it.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
And we were just talking about your practice. People are wondering kind of, do you accept insurance, that kind of thing? Let's get that question out of the way before we dive in.
So I'll do a quick little story about that. When we first started plant-based telehealth, we didn't want to deal with the insurance piece. We just started with as low a cost as we could and still the administrative cost of running a practice. And when I sold plant-based telehealth and I decided to work with another partners on building a company called Mora, where we would actually start utilizing insurance and Medicare, I will tell you, I sort of appreciated where the jungle and swamp that I was walking through, but I never truly appreciated the thousands of different policies and different ways and people turning you down. And we struggled for a year and a half and we got some traction, but we didn't have the ability to sustain. So I am keeping my life simple. I only do cash. I can provide a super bill. So if you have out of network benefits that you can actually go ahead and submit that and potentially get that covered. So I do apologize for not accepting insurance. It's not from lack of desire, but just the lack of, I can't. I can't even tell you.
Yeah, but patients can use their health savings account.
Yes,
Yeah.
HSA, FSA, I'm happy to give you a letter, give you a receipt, all of that you need, 100%. Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. That is always a big question on people's minds, and I just wanted to get that out there at the beginning.
Appreciate that.
Okay. So here is a question about calcification of the arteries.
Mm.
What strategies do you have to reduce calcification, and what's kind of the expected rate of change that one might see?
Okay, so I think this is a really important thing to understand. So let's say that I have someone who's walking with the elevated cholesterol. They've been pretty strict, whole food, plant-based, pretty compliant. They're doing everything they can. They're still seeing some struggles. Maybe there's some inflammatory markers that look normal or slightly elevated. I think this is where a coronary artery calcium score can be very beneficial. This will add conversation because it adds data. And there are some interesting guidelines with the ACC, the American College of Cardiology, about what numbers to be looking for. So when you see calcifications in your coronary arteries, those are the ones that feed the heart. And I just want to highlight one thing that's fun to share is that when you look at the heart and the aorta is a big artery that comes out of it, the first arteries that it goes to are the coronary arteries, and it feeds itself. So I think we could take a lesson from the heart. We need to take care of ourselves first. So I like sharing that. But anyway, so when we're looking at those coronaries, there's that, the widowmaker, the LAD, the left anterior descending. Depends also where the calcifications are, but what to expect. If your calcium score is 0, fantastic. Keep doing what you're doing. Let's work on inflammation. Let's really work on solidifying some things. I have a cholesterol lowering protocol that can work pretty well with some people, around a 25% drop. That is a free resource. I have a free community on school as well, that I'm happy to share that. Now, when we start seeing people understanding that this is calcified plaque, right? This is not going to change, okay? So we're not going to see reduction in the calcified plaque picture. However, what we're doing is we're decreasing the junior plaque, or what we could call the real problem makers, right? So these are the ones that are going to flick off and cause, because now, so imagine if you have a scratch and you see the blood and the clotting that occurs, that can happen inside the arteries, right? You have that artery, interior of the artery, and there's some damage, the platelets will come, build a clot, and flick it down. You'll have a heart attack, stroke, whatever. So that's the piece that we're healing, right? We're healing that piece. The calcification is there, but the calcifications aren't what's going to kill you. All it tells me is there's a disease process occurring or has occurred, so that you're at higher risk than someone who has a calcification score of 0, right? A CAC score of 0. So it's a discussion on, okay, this is really helpful, because sometimes I had one case that really stood out. She was, and it gets to the LP a little late. I have a couple of stories. Anyway, but one particular patient, she was doing everything she could, but she could not get her cholesterol down. I was like, she'd been whole food plant-based and a pretty good whole food plant-based eater for about 7 years. So this is not like someone overnight. We checked her coronary artery and calcium score. It was over 600, right? So now this is someone who I'm very concerned about, right? So we go and have her see one of the plant-based cardiologists, and they do put her on medications. And I think that's a very appropriate strategy, right? So we have to look at all the nuances here. So you're not going to see the calcification, so to speak, disappear, but you're going to decrease those risks of those things that actually do matter, like that junior plaque, so to speak, where it can really disrupt and cause problems. You'll see inflammation decrease, because we have to look at heart disease and all those risk factors as inflammation, cholesterol, a variety of things that work together. To really set the stage for a serious situation.
Okay, thank you.
Mhm.
So Marlon asked a question about the low white blood cell count, because you had mentioned that. You've mentioned inflammation several times as well. So can you just kind of review your response around that? You talked about a test for inflammation markers, which someone else asked about. Can you just kind of recap that for me, please?
Yeah, for sure. So when I look at someone, let's highlight two individuals. So we have someone who's been eating a whole food plant-based diet for many years, is at an appropriate weight, is incorporating those things that we know we all should be doing. Their white blood cell count might be hovering in the low normal, like 4, 3.5, 2.5. If we get less than 2.5, I'm a little bit concerned because when you also look at what we call a white cell differential. So we have the whole number, right? And then we look at the different types of white blood cells. So if those numbers are off, that's a little bit more, something else might be going on. But if you just have some little bit lower white blood cell count and you're healthy, you feel good, you have good energy, you're not sick all the time, things aren't crazy, that's probably your normal, right? So remember, when we look at labs, these are quartiles, right? So we're looking at people, 95% of the population will fall within this category of normal. There's 2.5 that will be outside normal, 2.5 over here, although I'm questioning that. But anyway, that's typically what we look at. But if I have someone on the other end, let's say that it's morbidly obese, we see someone with a BMI greater than 30, 35, you will often see their white blood cell counts hover around 12, 13, 14, sometimes 16 constantly. And when we measure the HSCRP, or the high sensitivity CRP, the C-reactive protein, that's more, it measures inflammation. So if I have someone who has a low white blood cell count, they're doing great, I'm going to expect their HSCRP to be nice and low. But if it is higher, I would like, what's going on? Is there dental work that's going on? I had a patient who had this, everything else looked fine, but the inflammatory markers were off the route, but it had a root canal that had been infected, so they couldn't feel it. They took care of it, and the inflammatory markers dropped. Really interesting, right? So anyway, when we look at those two opposite spectrums, you'll see inflammation markers higher here along with the white blood cell. These are what we call acute phase reactants, and the white blood cells will be higher versus your white blood cells will be lower. So, the normal population, when they're basing these normal parameters, they're not looking at a healthy blue zone audience, right? They're looking at the standard American normal human American experience of being overweight, dealing with inflammation, dealing with chronic disease, and versus a whole food plant-based eater who has literally reversed that disease or staying away from that because of how they're eating and moving and doing things differently. Their inflammation is going to be significantly lower, which will definitely, because remember, inflammation almost sets the stage for chronic disease to evolve, right? Because it's disrupting the system and stuff. So there's other markers that you can measure with your heart as well. Your oxidated LDL, you could look at myeloperoxidase, because there's some different journeys along that. But anyway, that's getting more nuanced into your cardiac labs, but you don't need those unless there's a problem that needs to be investigated.
Sure. Thank you so much. That was great. So kind of switching gears a little bit here. What about raising plant-based kids? Do you have any particular resources that you might recommend to someone who's raising plant-based children?
Yes, I do have an ebook that I wrote many moons ago that someone else asked about this, so I will take this as a universe clue saying write it, that I need to revamp. I even have a coloring book. I hired someone to create cartoons that people can color, little kids, and they're like little superheroes. You have Einstein eggplant and Anna banana, and I think there's like 8 superheroes. They're really fun. So I think I can build that out. But as far as, I think there's a great resources, Plant-Based Juniors. There are 2 RDs, registered dietitians, that have some great resources. Brittany just had her baby, so she had a beautiful pregnancy. This little guy is a chunk too. And so she's breastfeeding and he's doing fabulous. But there is some here when we talk about kids. There's 1 or 2 pages. But I do want to go a little bit deeper on that for resources for folks for sure.
Gotcha. And with Plant-Based Juniors, is that a website, a book, a
I
group?
think it's a website. I think it's plantbasedjuniors.com, but don't hold me
Okay.
wrong. Just Google Plant-Based Juniors. They have
Gotcha.
good stuff. Yeah.
Gotcha. Okay. Well, Mimi is asking, and I'm assuming maybe a provider, how can a provider start a telemedicine practice? I know that's a massive, massive question, but what might be a first step for this person if they want to look into this option?
Oh my Lord. I've been asked this question. I almost think I can make a career out of helping people do this because I'm pretty sure I made all the mistakes that you shouldn't and don't want to make. Where's a great resource to do that? That's a great question. Why don't you go to my website and message me, whoever you were, and I'll be happy to have an offline conversation about that. How about that? I'm happy to answer questions.
Thank you so much, so
Yeah.
much. So here we're going back to menopause, kind of where you started kind of this conversation this evening. What is the most important non-medical treatment for menopause that you might recommend? And I know that's incredibly basic because every person may be, a different situation,
I
but a
think there's going to
non-medical.
be a few levers that you can do as far as menopause, depending on just how symptomatic you are. If you have a few hot flashes and you're doing pretty well, there might be some tweaking of the diet. So I would say one of the big ones would be is to incorporate soy products, right? So because those isoflavones act as a competition when you're still having estrogen, when you still are creating estrogen, when you eat soy products, what it does is it competes with your native estrogen. And that's why we're seeing, and it prefers there's two different estrogen receptors, alpha and beta, and they act differently based on the tissue. But anyway, when you eat these isoflavones, it competes with your native estrogen, but it's a much weaker response. So when it locks into a receptor, the response to the cell is much weaker, about 1,000 times weaker. So that's why you'll see a decreased risk of breast cancer. You'll see a decreased risk of recurrence of breast cancer. Excuse me. And some other things. So when you are in menopause, remember now we're adding in these phytoestrogens that will kind of alleviate some of those symptoms from the lack of estrogen. So there's that piece too. It decreases cholesterol. It's great for bone health. It's also great for protein source. So those are some things. So if you can start incorporating about 2 servings of the whole soy bean, like edamame, tempeh, though the whole soybean, I think Eden has the canned variety if you don't want to cook it, or go to the dried bean, or you're going to get about half the dose in tofu, soy milk, those type of more processed tofu or soy products, which are still fine. Oh, soy curls, that would also be another. I love soy curls. Yeah, I'll go buy some soy curls. And so, but the soy curls would be the whole soybean. They just kind of stretch it out and how they manufacture it. But yeah, so that's where I would say the number one thing you could do is to start incorporating more soy products.
Thank you for that great advice.
Yep.
So now we're going to switch over to men. So there's a
Okay.
couple of questions. And one of those was from someone who's kind of wondering about osteopenia in her husband.
Yeah.
He has stress fractures from running. What do you kind of recommend for osteopenia for men? And then there was also another question, just in general, practical health advice for men who are over the age of 35. So I don't know if there can be some
Yeah.
in between those two or not.
Yeah. So first of all, depending on the age of this, because men still get osteoporosis, it's less than women, of course. But I would ask, how old is him? Does he actually have osteopenia, or was this just a overuse stress fracture? Like, has he actually had the DEXA scan that showed that he had osteopenia, or are you just making an assumption? So that's number one. Let's clarify what we mean by osteopenia. Now, if he has osteopenia and he's still relatively in the younger category of middle age, because as I get older, I'm like, I'm not old yet. I'm waiting for this thing to happen. I'm like, where is it coming? Exactly. And so, in the sense of looking at that, as like, I would definitely have his testosterone checked, right? Because the low testosterone is a really important piece. I had a young man, 45, went to pick something up when they were moving and actually fractured his back. That was their first clue that he had severe osteoporosis. And once we started having conversations, he had had the low testosterone before because of he'd had some fatigue, but this was before his plant-based journey, but he never was offered testosterone replacement therapy. This is an appropriate place for testosterone replacement therapy, right? So there's also, when we look at menopause, there's menopausal hormone therapy, which is a much lower dose than what we would get for a woman who was early, maybe had surgical menopause at an early age for hormone replacement. So there's some very, again, we're looking at a different category. One of medications that are prescribed now, you know, the estradiol, the transdermal is bioidentical that you can just write a prescribe. You don't go get it compounded. It's just a FDA regulated, micronized progesterone. Those are the conversations you'd be having. For men, I'm like, you need to have your testosterone checked because you may be in a place that that's an appropriate medication for you. And then I would also look, you know, there's other tests. There's other tests of things to say what's going on. Is it your parathyroid hormone? Is your vitamin D low? What does your diet look like? So those are the things that for men, I would say. Now, for general advice for men who are over 35, it's going to be very similar for women, right? The lifestyle medicine principles are equivalent for men. But you guys, because you already carry around more muscle mass, you tend to respond faster, which is fabulous. And you have less of the emotional eating that I'm dealing with women. Maybe that's just my bias because I see mostly women, but it doesn't seem, it seems very easy. Like the husband's like my husband, he's like, "Are you still cooking?" And I'm like, "Yeah." He's like, "Okay." He went on to lose 70 pounds. My husband, over 30 years of marriage, had gained this weight slowly. He would tell me, he goes, "I don't tell you, but I used to drive through McDonald's and get the Happy Meals, two of them, because they were so good." And, you know, he had an hour drive home. And I was like, "Oh my gosh." And we never thought, you know, I was like, this is just, anyway. But those are the things you're like, you, again, I'm not saying that all men don't have food relationship or overeating, but they're usually stressed. I mean, there's a lot of nuance here, but boy, men can respond so quickly. And if you have a spouse that's willing to be on this journey with you and help you with the cooking, that's amazing. So it's going to be focusing on more higher protein plant foods. You know, don't, you know, do anything that's going to risk that muscle mass that you have. Hoard it, hoard it, and make sure you're doing the resistance training, making sure you're getting that 78 hours of sleep. It's all the same stuff. And just really understand that when you travel or when you're at work, that you need to be incorporating these same principles, right? So that's where I may see my men audience change a little bit, is that they go to work and they're like, I eat at home because my wife is cooking for me or whatever. And I'm just making some general assumptions. Like that may be, you know, we live in a world that's very different. Like some men might do all the cooking. That's, I just hasn't been my experience. But with that, make sure that you're doing, when you travel, when you're at work or whatever you're doing, that you still incorporate the best, you plan ahead, right? So I would say that would be the general sense. And make sure you're getting those labs too, right? We want to make sure your cholesterol is where it needs to be. Make sure that you're feeling well and have good energy, and that you're paying attention to your sleep and your blood pressure. Many times in my patients, at least for me, maybe it's because I'm a woman, like I said, I attract women, is that the men are drug along. And they're like, "I need you to look at my husband too." I'm like, "Okay." And he's like, "I'm here because of my wife." I said, "You know, men live longer because they have wives. Just
Yeah.
saying." So anyway, but yeah, that would be my general guidance, is just everything I tell women is the same. And
Great.
soy's good for you too, by the way.
Yes. Yep.
So we are at our time limit, but I'm going to throw
Okay.
one more question in there because it'll be easy, I think, and we can wrap up with that one. Marilyn is asking about the bone density test, and you mentioned DEXA scan in your last answer, so I figured this would be a good way to wrap it up. Do you recommend them? And if so, at what age would you recommend that women start getting those? And do you also
Yeah.
recommend that men start getting them, I guess, is the...
Yeah, you know, I think you're going to hear different questions. I was like, when the way I've always practiced medicine is, if I'm going to order a test, if you're not willing to have a conversation about the results and do something to intervene on it, then I'm not going to order it. But if I'm worried about something and I'm going to tell you this test could be beneficial, I'm ordering it because there's going to act on it. So again, some people may be like, you don't need that, you don't need this, you don't need that. I am a big fan of the more data. I'm not afraid of data, right? So if the data says I have osteopenia, great, let's figure out something to do about it. But I'm not going to go, I don't want to say, because I'm on a plant-based diet, my belief is that I don't need a DEXA scan. If you want to live that way, go for it, my friend. But that is not the way that I see people thrive. It's like, I do recommend still the guidelines based on, they say to wait till you're older, postmenopause. I'm like, the sooner I can get an idea if someone has a healthy bone density, great. Then we can have a different conversation because that can set the baseline. So I would say probably 45 was perimenopause starts hitting most women. If we can get the insurance to pay for it, if you're willing to get it, that would be fantastic information to have. That would be probably the ideal starting point. And I think it would be the same for men, right? We could look at maybe a little bit older, 50, 55, but yeah, why can't we have men do a DEXA scan as well? Especially if they're ever had or been told that they have low testosterone. I think that warrants a discussion.
Thank you so much. I think we could stay here all evening and just keep asking you questions. So we really sincerely appreciate your time. I will step away and let Dr. Hollie wrap things up for us.
Well, Dr. Marbas, this has been truly delightful and enlightening, and we just appreciate your time and your expertise. And this recording will go out in a week. And Natasha, if you could include a couple things, the title of her new book and also her website. It's really simple, drmarbas.com, drmarbas.com. So you can get more information. So again, thank you, Dr. Marbas. Thank you for sharing today. It has been very, very informative.
Thank you, Dr. Hollie, for having me, and Natasha and everybody. I'm so thankful and grateful for being here. So thank you.
It's a privilege. On behalf of the T. Colin Campbell Center for Nutrition Studies, this has been Spotlight in Health with Dr. Laurie Marbas. We look for you guys again next month when we'll have another topic that'll be exciting as well. Thanks for joining us. Bye-bye.